The text message arrived on a Tuesday. "I can't do this anymore. I've moved my things out. The divorce papers will be delivered tomorrow." Just like that, 15 years of marriage ended on my phone screen as I sat in the oncologist's waiting room. My wedding ring suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I stared at the message, reading it again and again, wondering if it was some kind of cruel joke. It wasn't. 3 weeks after my stage 3 breast cancer diagnosis, Daniel had decided he couldn't do this anymore. I'd lost my hair, my left breast, and now my husband, all before my 42nd birthday. But what Daniel didn't know was that 2 days earlier, I'd quietly removed him as the beneficiary of my $5 million life insurance policy, a policy he'd forgotten existed, a policy that had been his idea in the first place. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I wasn't always a cynic about love. In fact, for most of my life, I was quite the opposite. I met Daniel during my senior year at Portland State University. He was completing his MBA while I was finishing my finance degree. We bumped into each other, literally, at a coffee shop near campus. His Americano spilled all over my economics textbook. He apologized profusely and insisted on replacing both my coffee and my book. 3 days later, we went on our first date. 6 months after that, he proposed on the scenic viewpoint at Mount Hood, with the snow-capped peak glowing pink in the sunset behind him. I said yes without hesitation. We were young, ambitious, and deeply in love, or so I thought. The early years of our marriage were good. We both landed solid jobs in Portland, Daniel at a prestigious marketing firm and me at Pacific Northwest Financial Group. We bought a charming craftsman-style house in a tree-lined neighborhood. We traveled when we could, built our careers, and talked about starting a family soon. But soon never seemed to arrive. There was always another promotion to chase, another renovation project for the house, another reason to wait. Looking back, I see now that Daniel was always moving the goalposts, always finding reasons to delay the future we'd planned. By our 10th anniversary, something had shifted between us. The easy intimacy of our early years had faded into a comfortable, but increasingly distant partnership. Daniel worked later and later hours. Business trips grew more frequent. I threw myself into my work as well, climbing the ranks at PNFG to become one of their senior financial analysts. We were still a team, in many ways, financially successful, socially active, outwardly happy. Friends called us the power couple. If I occasionally caught Daniel texting late at night or being vague about his whereabouts, I pushed the doubts aside. After all, we had built a life together. We had history, shared dreams, a beautiful home. I wasn't about to threaten all that, over what might be nothing. It was Daniel who had insisted on the substantial life insurance policies for both of us. "It's just smart financial planning," he'd said. "We need to protect each other." I agreed. It made perfect sense given our mortgage and lifestyle. So at age 35, we each took out policies. Mine for $1, $5 million, his for the same. The paperwork was filed away with our other financial documents, and I rarely thought about it again. At least, not until the mammogram results came back abnormal. The first indication that something was wrong came during my routine annual checkup. Dr. Miranda felt something concerning and sent me for additional screening. Even then, I wasn't particularly worried. I was 41, fit, ate well, and had no family. History of breast cancer. Cancer happened to other people, not to me. The call from the radiologist came while I was preparing quarterly financial projections at work. "We'd like you to come in for further testing," she said, her voice professionally neutral. Still, I wasn't alarmed. More tests were just being thorough. I didn't even tell Daniel about the follow-up appointment. Why worry him over what was surely nothing? I scheduled it during my lunch break and planned to be back at the office by 2. But I never made it back to the office that day. Instead, I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for nearly 3 hours, staring blankly through the windshield, the radiologist's words echoing in my head. Highly suspicious for malignancy. The biopsy was scheduled for the following morning. That night, I finally told Daniel. We were washing dishes after dinner, one of the few routines we still maintained together. I had some follow-up tests today, I said, trying to keep my voice casual as I dried a plate. They found something concerning in my breast. I'm having a biopsy tomorrow. Daniel's hand stilled in the soapy water. He didn't turn to look at me. What does that mean exactly? It means they think it might be cancer, but they need to confirm it with a biopsy. He nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the sink. I'm sure it's nothing. You're too young for cancer. His reaction struck me as odd, detached, almost dismissive, but I chalked it up to shock. People process difficult news in different ways, I told myself. And maybe he was right. Maybe it would turn out to be nothing. It wasn't nothing. The biopsy confirmed invasive ductal carcinoma, stage 3 breast cancer that had already spread to several lymph nodes. The treatment plan was aggressive: surgery first, followed by chemotherapy and radiation. I sat in Dr. Elliot Pearson's office, clutching Daniel's hand as the oncologist outlined what the coming months would look like. Daniel asked questions about success rates and timeline. I asked about side effects and whether I should take a leave from work. We were both in problem-solving mode. We were going to face this together. Or so I thought. The first surgery, a mastectomy of my left breast and removal of several lymph nodes, was scheduled quickly. Daniel drove me to the hospital and waited during the procedure. He brought me home and helped me get settled. He picked up my prescriptions and made sure I took them on schedule. He did everything right, at least outwardly. But there was a distance to his care, a mechanical quality that I couldn't quite name. Do you want to talk about reconstruction options? I asked one evening, about a week after the surgery. I was reviewing some materials Dr. Pearson had given me. Daniel looked up from his laptop, his expression unreadable. Isn't it a bit soon to think about that? Let's focus on getting through the cancer first. Of course, I said quickly. I just thought it might be nice to look forward to something after all this is over. Daniel nodded and returned to his work. The conversation was over. The first chemotherapy session was the day everything changed. Daniel had an unavoidable meeting and couldn't take me, so my best friend Olivia stepped in. A nurse herself, Olivia was the perfect chemo companion, knowledgeable, calming, and unafraid of hospitals. She held my hand when the IV went in and distracted me with silly stories from the pediatric ward where she worked. You know, she said carefully as we were waiting for the treatment to finish, Daniel seems a bit absent lately. Is everything okay between you two? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I bristled slightly at the question. He's under a lot of pressure at work, and this isn't easy for him either. Olivia gave me a look I couldn't quite interpret. Rebecca, I know this isn't something you want to hear right now, but Nathan saw Daniel having dinner with a woman at Riverside Bistro last week. They looked close. Nathan was Daniel's brother. They weren't particularly close, but they ran in some of the same business circles. It was probably a client meeting, I said dismissively, though a cold feeling had settled in my stomach. Nathan said they were holding hands across the table. I fell silent, the gentle beeping of the infusion pump suddenly very loud in my ears. Client dinners don't involve hand-holding. Even in my chemo-addled state, I knew that much. When I got home that evening, feeling nauseated and exhausted, Daniel wasn't there. A text message said he was working late. I dragged myself to bed alone, too sick and tired to even cry. The pattern continued. As the chemo drugs ravaged my body, Daniel became increasingly absent. Business trips multiplied. Late meetings became the norm. When he was home, he slept in the guest room, claiming he didn't want to disturb me when I wasn't feeling well. On the surface, it was considerate. In reality, it was the beginning of his exit. It was during my second round of chemo that I found the email. Daniel had left his laptop open when he went to shower. I'd never been the type to snoop, but something, intuition perhaps, made me click on his inbox. And there it was, a hotel, reservation confirmation for 2 at a coastal resort in Cannon Beach. The dates coincided with a business conference he'd mentioned the week before. The confirmation email was copied to a Vanessa Clark. I didn't know any Vanessa. With shaking hands, I dug deeper. There were dozens of emails between them going back months, well before my diagnosis. Dinner reservations, weekend getaways disguised as business trips. Intimate messages that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. In one particularly painful exchange from just after my surgery, Daniel had written, "This situation is temporary. Once it's resolved, we can start our life together properly." The situation was me. My cancer. My inconvenient illness that was delaying his new beginning with Vanessa. I closed the laptop and returned to bed before Daniel finished his shower. I didn't confront him. Not then. I was too weak, too vulnerable, too dependent on his health insurance and financial support to risk blowing up our marriage in the middle of my cancer treatment. Instead, I began to plan. The next morning, I called Stephanie Wong, an attorney I'd met through a women's networking group years ago. I explained my situation in clinical terms, as if discussing a particularly complex financial scenario at work rather than the implosion of my personal life. I need to protect myself, I concluded. But I'm not ready for a direct confrontation yet. Stephanie was compassionate, but practical. The first step is understanding exactly what your financial picture looks like, she advised. Gather all. Documentation on your assets, accounts, insurance policies, everything. Knowledge is power, Rebecca. That afternoon, I went through our home office methodically, scanning important documents while Daniel was at work. Among them was our life insurance policy. As I reviewed it, a cold realization dawned on me. If I died from this cancer, Daniel would receive $1. $5 million, free and clear, to start his new life with Vanessa. The thought made me physically ill. I called our insurance company the next day. The representative explained that as the owner of my policy, I had the right to change the beneficiary at any time. No notification to the previous beneficiary was required. All I needed to do was submit a beneficiary change form. "Who would you like to designate as your new beneficiary?" the representative asked. I thought for only a moment. My mother, Margaret Johnson. The form arrived by email within the hour. I printed it, signed it, scanned it, and sent it back. By the end of the business day, my mother was officially the sole beneficiary of my life insurance policy. Daniel would never know unless I told him, or unless I died and he expected a payout that would never come. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about taking back some small measure of control in a life that had spiraled beyond my grasp. Cancer had taken my health, my hair, my breast. Daniel had taken my trust, my future, my sense of security. But this one decision was mine. If the worst happened, at least my mother would be taken care of, not the man who had betrayed me when I needed him most. The night after I changed the beneficiary, I sat in our backyard garden alone, watching the sunset. The early summer roses were in bloom, their scent heavy in the evening air. I'd planted those roses when we first bought the house. Daniel had teased me about my gardening enthusiasm, but he'd helped dig the holes and build the trellises. We had plans to add a small pond the following spring. Now I wondered if I'd be alive to see it, and whether Daniel would keep the garden after I was gone. I was so lost in thought that I didn't hear Daniel come outside until he spoke. "Feeling better today?" he asked, keeping a careful distance. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Good. That's good." He hesitated. "Listen, I need to go out of town this weekend. Sales conference in Seattle. It's mandatory." Seattle was a 2-hour drive. Cannon Beach was 2 hours in the opposite direction. I knew exactly where he was going and who he was going with. "Fine," I said flatly. "I'll ask Olivia to come stay." "Great," he said, looking relieved that I hadn't argued. "I'll leave Friday after work and be back Sunday evening." I nodded again, and he retreated inside. I remained in the garden until the stars came out, formulating my plan. I would get through the cancer treatment. I would rebuild my strength. And then, when I was ready, I would confront Daniel with what I knew and end our marriage on my terms, not his. But Daniel had other plans. The weekend of his Seattle conference, I took a significant turn for the worse. The cumulative effects of chemotherapy had weakened my immune system severely, and I developed a high fever. Olivia rushed me to the emergency room, where I was admitted with neutropenic sepsis, a life-threatening condition for cancer patients. Olivia called Daniel repeatedly. His phone went straight to voicemail. She left increasingly urgent messages. No response. She contacted Nathan, who claimed not to know where his brother was. Finally, in desperation, she called Daniel's parents. They hadn't heard from him either. I drifted in and out of consciousness for 2 days as the medical team fought to stabilize me. Olivia never left my side. My mother arrived from her small farm outside Portland, her face lined with worry. My sister Jennifer came with homemade bone broth and blankets from home, but Daniel was nowhere to be found. He returned on Sunday, night as planned, walking into our house to find it empty. Only then did he check his messages. Only then did he learn that his wife was fighting for her life in the ICU. He arrived at the hospital just as I was being moved out of intensive care, the crisis having passed. "Where were you?" Olivia demanded, intercepting him in the hallway. "My phone died," he stammered. "I didn't get any messages until I got home." "For 2 entire days?" Olivia's voice was thick with disgust. "She could have died, Daniel." He had no answer for that. When he finally came to my hospital room, I was too weak to confront him. My mother sat rigidly in the chair beside my bed, her expression making it clear she wasn't leaving us alone. Daniel bent to kiss my forehead, but I turned away. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know." "We'll talk about it at home," I managed, my voice raspy from the intubation I'd needed during the worst of the infection. But we never had that conversation. I was discharged 3 days later, now deemed medically fragile and in need of close monitoring. My mother moved into our guest room to care for me. Daniel retreated to his home office, emerging only for meals, and brief, awkward conversations about household logistics. The gulf between us had become unbridgeable. 2 weeks later, I found the lease agreement on his laptop. He had rented a condo in downtown Portland with a move-in date for the following week. He hadn't mentioned a word about moving out, about leaving me while I was still undergoing cancer treatment, about walking away when I was at my most vulnerable. But the document was there in black and white, signed and dated. That night, I confronted him. We stood in the kitchen, the heart of the home we'd created together, like strangers. "When were you going to tell me about the condo?" I asked quietly. Daniel's face paled, but he recovered quickly. "I was waiting for the right time." "The right time," I repeated. "Would that be before or after my next chemotherapy session?" "Rebecca, this isn't working. It hasn't been working for a long time. The cancer it just made everything harder." "Made what harder, Daniel? Your affair with Vanessa?" His eyes widened slightly, the only confirmation I needed. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter how I know. I cut him off. What matters is that you've been planning your exit since before I got sick. You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and now you're abandoning me during cancer treatment. That's not fair, he protested weakly. I tried to make it work. I drove you to appointments. I made sure you had everything you needed. Everything except a faithful husband. He had no response to that. Just go, I said finally. If you're leaving anyway, just go now. He hesitated, then nodded. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce. Do that. He left that night, taking only a suitcase of clothes and his personal items. I sat at the kitchen table for hours afterward, numb and yet somehow relieved. The pretense was over. The constant anxiety of wondering where he was, what he was doing, who he was with, it was finished. Now I could focus entirely on healing, on surviving, on rebuilding my life without him. The next day, Olivia helped me change the locks. The divorce papers arrived exactly 1 week later, delivered by courier to my front door. I should have been upset, perhaps even devastated. Instead, I felt oddly calm as I reviewed the documents with Stephanie. Daniel wanted a clean break. He was willing to let me keep the house in exchange for his retirement accounts. He asked for specific pieces of furniture and artwork but left the rest. He even offered 6 months of alimony to help during this difficult time, a gesture that might have seemed generous to outsiders but struck me as profoundly inadequate, given our 15 years together and my current health crisis. This is actually a relatively fair opening offer, Stephanie observed, sounding surprised. Though the alimony should be extended, considering your medical situation. I nodded absently, my mind elsewhere. Does it mention anything about the life insurance policy? Stephanie flipped through the pages. No, there's no reference to insurance at all. Did you want to address that? No, I said quickly. It's fine. I just wanted to be sure. Stephanie gave me a curious look but didn't press the issue. We spent the next hour discussing counterproposals and negotiation strategies. By the time she left, we had a clear plan for moving forward. I would get through the divorce just as I would get through cancer. One step at a time, with clarity and purpose. That evening, as I sat on my porch swing watching the sunset behind the West Hills, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was brief. He told me you were in remission. I didn't know you were still sick. I'm so sorry. It was unsigned, but I knew it was from her. From Vanessa. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Daniel had lied to her just as he had lied to me. Perhaps she was beginning to see the man he truly was. The man who could walk away from his wife of 15 years while she was fighting for her life. The man who could start a new relationship built on a foundation of deception. I felt no animosity toward Vanessa. If anything, I pitied her. She was just beginning a journey I was finally finishing. The weeks that followed brought dual challenges: continuing cancer treatment and navigating divorce proceedings. My body grew weaker from the chemotherapy, but my resolve strengthened. I accepted help now, from my mother, who extended her stay indefinitely, from Olivia, who organized a rotation of friends to deliver meals and provide transportation to medical appointments, from my colleagues at Pacific Northwest Financial, who arranged for me to work remotely on a reduced schedule, and from my sister, Jennifer, who brought her children to brighten my weekends with their innocent energy. I began attending a cancer support group at the community center near Evergreen Cancer Center. There I met others walking similar paths, some with partners, who had risen magnificently to the challenge, others who, like me, were facing cancer alone after relationships couldn't withstand the strain. Lisa, a vibrant kindergarten teacher with stage 4 ovarian cancer, had been abandoned by her husband of 20 years. Mark, battling aggressive lymphoma, had been ghosted by his long-term boyfriend. Tara, a young mother with cervical cancer, was raising her toddler alone after her husband decided he couldn't handle the pressure. We call ourselves the cancer castaways, Lisa told me with gallows humor during my first meeting. Welcome to the club no one wants to join. There was something powerfully healing about that group. We understood each other in ways that even our most well-meaning friends and family couldn't. We shared tips for managing side effects, recommendations for the best soft foods during mouth-sore flare-ups, tricks for securing insurance approvals, but more importantly, we shared the unique grief of losing relationships at the very moment we most needed support. Together, we were learning to carry that particular wound. Daniel and I communicated only through our attorneys now. The divorce proceeded with surprising efficiency, both of us eager to finalize the separation of our lives. I learned through Stephanie that he had moved in with Vanessa, abandoning the condo he had rented. I told myself I didn't care, and most days that was true. My energy was focused entirely on survival, beating cancer first, healing from betrayal second. 3 months after Daniel moved out, I received unexpected news. My latest scans showed a significant reduction in tumor activity. The aggressive treatment protocol was working. This is very encouraging, Dr. Pearson told me, his normally reserved demeanor brightening. If we continue to see this kind of response, we might be looking at remission sooner than expected. I called my mother first with the news, then Olivia, then my support group. I didn't call Daniel. He had forfeited the right to celebrate my victories when he walked away from my struggles. That night, I treated myself to a small glass of wine, my first since beginning treatment, and sat in my garden among the late summer blooms. The roses I had planted with Daniel years ago had flourished despite his absence. Perhaps there was a metaphor in that. I pulled out my journal and wrote, "Today, I learned I might live, really live. Now I need to decide what that life will look like." The divorce was finalized in late October, just as the trees in my neighborhood reached the peak of their autumn glory. Daniel got his freedom, his artwork, and his retirement funds. I got the house, 6 months of alimony, extended to 1 year after Stephanie's negotiations, and my privacy. The insurance policies were never mentioned. 2 weeks later, I completed my final chemotherapy session. Olivia, my mother, and Jennifer were all there, cheering as I rang the ceremonial bell that signified the end of treatment. I still faced radiation therapy and years of hormone therapy, but the most brutal phase of my cancer journey was behind me. As we left the cancer center, I spotted a familiar figure in the parking lot, Daniel, leaning against his car, clearly waiting for me. My heart leaped into my throat. "Do you want us to stay?" my mother asked, noticing him too. "No," I said, surprising myself. "I can handle this." I walked toward him slowly, conscious of how different I looked from the woman he had married. My hair was just beginning to grow back, a soft silver fuzz covering my scalp. I'd lost 20 pounds during treatment, my clothes hanging loosely on my frame. But for the first time in months, my eyes were clear and determined. "Rebecca," he said as I approached, his voice uncertain. "You look better." "I am better," I replied. "What are you doing here, Daniel?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Vanessa and I broke up. She couldn't handle the guilt, I guess. And I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us, about what happened, about how I handled everything." I waited, saying nothing. "I made a terrible mistake," he continued, his eyes pleading. "I was scared and selfish and weak, but seeing you now, knowing you're getting better, I wonder if there's any chance we could try again." A year ago, even 6 months ago, those words might have moved me. I might have been tempted by the familiar comfort of our life together, by the prospect of not facing an uncertain future alone. But now, they rang hollow. "Why are you really here, Daniel?" I asked quietly. He looked startled by the directness of the question. "I told you I want..." Is it because Vanessa left? Or because your company's Portland division is being restructured and you're worried about your position? Nathan mentioned that last week. Daniel's expression confirmed my suspicions. You didn't come back for me, I continued. You came back for the security I represent. The stable home, the supportive wife, the comfortable life. That's what you miss, not me. That's not fair, Rebecca. I do miss you. Maybe you do, I conceded, but not enough, not when it really mattered. I took a deep breath. I changed the beneficiary on my life insurance policy the day after I found out about Vanessa. His face registered genuine shock. You... What? Why would you do that? Because I realized that you were more likely to benefit from my death than my recovery. That's a terrible thing to understand about the person who promised to love you in sickness and in health. That's absurd, he protested. I never thought about the insurance. It doesn't matter now, I interrupted. It's done. The divorce is final. My treatment is complete. We both need to move forward with our separate lives. Just like that? 15 years and it's just over? I looked at him. Really looked at him, for the first time since he'd left. I saw the fine lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when we met, the silver threading through his dark hair, the slight softening of his once athletic frame. I had memorized every detail of his face over our years together. I had loved him deeply, completely, without reservation. And now, standing before him in the hospital parking lot where he'd come not out of love but out of need, I felt the last fragments of that attachment finally release. It was over the moment you decided I was a burden rather than a partner. I said softly, "Goodbye, Daniel." I turned and walked back to where my mother, sister, and best friend were waiting, their faces a mixture of concern and pride. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. For the first time since my diagnosis, I was looking only forward. 6 months later, I stood on the scenic viewpoint at Mount Hood, the same spot where Daniel had proposed to me all those years ago. The spring air was crisp, the mountains still capped with snow against a brilliant blue sky. I'd brought myself here deliberately to reclaim this place as part of my story rather than our history. My hair had grown back in soft waves, surprisingly, a shade darker than before, and with a streak of silver at my temple that I decided to keep as a badge of the battle I'd fought. I'd regained weight and strength through a combination of physical therapy and gentle yoga. The radiation burns had faded from my skin, though the scars of my surgery remained, a permanent reminder of all I had endured and survived. My prognosis was good. Not guaranteed. Cancer never offers absolute certainty, but promising enough that I had begun making plans again. I had returned to work full-time at Pacific Northwest Financial. I had joined a dragon boat team for cancer survivors. I had started volunteering at Evergreen Cancer Center, supporting newly diagnosed patients as they began their own journeys. My mother had returned to her farmhouse but visited regularly. Olivia remained my steadfast friend, now planning her wedding to a kind emergency room doctor she'd met during one of my hospital stays. My support group, the Cancer Castaways, continued to meet monthly, our conversations gradually shifting from survival to living. And the life insurance policy that had once seemed so important? I kept it in place, with my mother as the primary beneficiary and the cancer center as a secondary beneficiary, not because I expected to need it any time soon, but because I understood now how quickly life could change, how important it was to protect those you truly love. As I stood looking out at the vast landscape below, I felt a profound sense of peace. Cancer had taken much from me, my breast, my hair, my marriage, my illusions about love and loyalty. But it had given me something too, clarity about what mattered, who mattered, and the kind of life I wanted to create for myself. I had been left when I was at my most vulnerable. I had been betrayed by the person who had promised to stand by me. But I had not been defeated. I had changed the beneficiary, yes, but more importantly, I had changed the beneficiary of my life. I was now investing my time, my energy, and my love in people who had proven themselves worthy. In myself. In a future I was determined to shape on my own terms. Daniel never did discover that I'd changed the life insurance beneficiary. It turned out not to matter. What mattered was that I had taken that first small step toward reclaiming my power during my darkest hour. Everything that followed, from changing the locks to declining his attempt at reconciliation, stemmed from that moment of clarity. The mountain stood silently before me, unchanging, yet ever-changing with the seasons and the light, like me. I took one last look, breathed deeply of the pine-scented air, and turned toward the path that would lead me back to my car, back to Portland, back to the life that waited for me there. A life that was entirely my own. I walked into the house alone that evening after everyone had gone. The silence wrapped around me like a familiar blanket, not uncomfortable, just present. 6 months earlier, such solitude would have terrified me. Now it felt like an old friend. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen island, the smooth granite cold beneath my fingertips. This house had witnessed everything: the happy early years, the gradual drift, the diagnosis, the betrayal, and now my rebirth. These walls had absorbed my screams of anger and my sobs of despair. They had watched as I curled up on the bathroom floor, sick from chemo, with no one to hold my hair back. And now they witnessed my quiet strength as I sipped tea, refusing Daniel's attempt to slither back into my life. The following morning, I had my first appointment with Dr. Pearson since completing chemotherapy. The radiation regimen would begin in 2 weeks, once my body had recovered somewhat from the ravages of chemo. Dr. Pearson's office was familiar territory now. The soothing blue walls, the landscape paintings, the surprisingly comfortable chairs, designed for patients who often sat receiving difficult news. "Your blood work looks encouraging," Dr. Pearson said, reviewing my chart. "White cell count is climbing back to normal range. How are you feeling otherwise?" "Stronger every day," I replied. "Still tired in the afternoons, but nothing like before." Dr. Pearson nodded, making notes. "And how are things at home? Any additional support you need as we move into radiation?" I hesitated. Dr. Pearson knew the broad strokes of my situation, that my husband had left during treatment, but not the details of our final interaction. "I'm managing well. My mother visits regularly, and I have friends who help with transportation and meals." "Good, good." He looked up from his notes, his eyes kind but assessing. "Rebecca, you've been through an extraordinary amount of trauma, not just physically, but emotionally. Have you considered speaking with our oncology social worker or therapist?" I shifted uncomfortably. I've been focused on physical survival. The emotional stuff seemed secondary. "It's all connected," he said gently. "Your emotional well-being impacts your physical recovery. We see better outcomes in patients who address both aspects." I thought about the cancer castaways group, how we shared medical tips but also the deep emotional wounds of abandonment. It helped, but perhaps it wasn't enough. "I'll think about it," I promised. "That's all I ask," Dr. Pearson replied. "Now let's go over the radiation plan." As I left the oncology center, I noticed a flyer on the community bulletin board. "Healing Through Expression, Art Therapy for Cancer Patients." It advertised a 6-week workshop meeting at the Japanese Garden in Washington Park, a place I had always found peaceful, even before my diagnosis. Something about the flyer called to me. I took a photo of the contact information with my phone. That night, I received an unexpected call from Nathan, Daniel's brother. We had never been particularly close, but I had always appreciated his straightforward nature. Unlike Daniel's parents, who had essentially ghosted me after the divorce, Nathan had occasionally checked in on me through Olivia. "Rebecca," he said when I answered, "I hope I'm not overstepping by calling." "It's fine, Nathan. What's going on?" He hesitated. "I saw Daniel yesterday. He mentioned seeing you at the cancer center." "He did," I confirmed, keeping my tone neutral. "He's not doing well, Rebecca. The thing with Vanessa ended badly. His position at work is in jeopardy. He's been staying on my couch for the past week." I felt a twinge of something. Not quite sympathy, but recognition of the messiness of life. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not sure what you expect me to do with that information." "Nothing," Nathan said quickly. "Absolutely nothing. That's not why I called. I called because I want you to know that whatever he might say, whatever he might try, you don't owe him anything. Not after what he did." I was surprised. "That's unexpected coming from you. He's your brother." "He's my brother, and I love him," Nathan acknowledged. "But what he did to you was unconscionable. I've never said this to you directly, but I'm deeply sorry for how he treated you, and I want you to protect yourself." There was a weight to his words that gave me pause. "Is there something specific I should know?" Nathan sighed heavily. "He's been asking questions about your insurance policies. Claimed he needed to tie up loose ends from the divorce. It felt off." The chill that ran through me had nothing to do with my lingering sensitivity to cold from chemotherapy. "Thank you for telling me. Just be careful, Rebecca. He's desperate, and desperate people can convince themselves of all sorts of things." After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone for a long while. Then I called Stephanie Wong. The next morning, I was in her office, clutching a mug of herbal tea as she reviewed the insurance documents and divorce decree. "The divorce settlement doesn't specifically address the life insurance policies," Stephanie confirmed. "But as the policy owner, you had every legal right to change the beneficiary. There's nothing Daniel can do about that now." "He's never directly asked about it," I said. "But his brother thinks he's fixating on loose ends from our financial entanglements." Stephanie's expression was thoughtful. "It might be worth notifying the insurance company about the situation. They can flag the policy to ensure any inquiries receive extra scrutiny." "Do you think he would actually try something?" The question hung in the air between us. "Probably not," Stephanie said. "But desperate people sometimes make poor choices. It costs nothing to be cautious." I left Stephanie's office with a plan. Call the insurance company. Install a security system at the house. Keep a careful record of any contact from Daniel. The fear I felt wasn't overwhelming. It was calculated, practical. I had survived cancer. I could certainly survive my ex-husband's desperate machinations. The next day, I met James Wilson for coffee. James had been my colleague at Pacific Northwest, financial for years, and during my medical leave, he had handled many of my clients with exceptional care. He had also been one of the few people from work who visited regularly during my treatment, bringing books and financial journals to keep my mind engaged even when my body was failing. "You look fantastic," he said when I arrived at the downtown cafe. "Truly, there's a light about you that was missing before." "Near-death experiences will do that," I replied with a wry smile. "Clarifies a lot of things." We spent an hour discussing my gradual return to work, starting with 3 days a week, then building back to full-time as my strength returned. James had suggestions for how to ease the transition, which clients might be appropriate to start with, which new developments I needed to catch up on. "The Blake portfolio has been particularly active," he noted. "They're looking at significant restructuring with the tax law changes." I nodded, making mental notes. It felt good to think about work again, to exercise my analytical mind after months of focusing solely on survival. I appreciate how thoroughly you've maintained everything, James. It would be a mess coming back otherwise. It's what partners do, he said simply. Then, seeming to realize the potential interpretation of his words, he quickly added, "Work partners, I mean. Colleagues." I smiled at his discomfort. "I understood what you meant." There was a brief, awkward silence before James cleared his throat. "So I heard through the grapevine that Daniel showed up at the cancer center last week. News travels fast. Olivia mentioned it to Amy in HR, who sits next to me." He shrugged apologetically. Small world. "He wanted to reconcile," I said flatly. I declined. James studied his coffee cup intently. "Good. That's good." Something in his tone made me look at him more closely. "You never liked him, did you?" "It wasn't my place to like or dislike your husband." "Ex-husband," I corrected. "And it's okay to admit it now." James met my eyes then. "No, I didn't like him. I thought he took you for granted long before. The cancer. The way he would call expecting you to drop everything for his needs. How he never showed up for office functions that were important to you. How he dismissed your work as less significant than his. It bothered me. I was surprised by his observations. Not that they were wrong, but that he had noticed what I myself had tried so hard to ignore. Why didn't you ever say anything? Would you have listened? He asked the question without accusation, just honest curiosity. I considered it carefully. Probably not, I admitted. I was too invested in the idea that we had a perfect marriage, the kind people envied. I didn't want to see the cracks. Cancer has a way of bringing reality into sharp focus, James observed. Cancer and betrayal, I added. Separately, they're brutal. Together, they're clarifying. The conversation shifted back to work matters, but something had changed in the dynamic between us. A new honesty, perhaps, or the acknowledgement of an awareness that had always existed beneath the surface of our professional relationship. When we parted, James hesitated before saying, "I'm glad you're coming back, Rebecca. The office hasn't been the same without you." That weekend, I attended my first session of the art therapy workshop at the Japanese garden. It was a perfect spring day, cherry blossoms in full bloom, the air fragrant and mild. The group was small, just 8 cancer patients at various stages of treatment and recovery. Our instructor, Elena, was a soft-spoken woman with silver-streaked black hair and the serene demeanor of someone who had faced her own battles. "Art therapy isn't about creating masterpieces," she explained as we settled, on benches near the koi pond. "It's about expression, giving form to feelings that might be too difficult or complex for words. Today, we'll start simply with color and emotion." She distributed heavy paper and watercolors to each of us. "Choose colors that represent how you felt when you were diagnosed. Don't overthink it. Let your intuition guide you." I stared at the blank page for several minutes, then selected deep blue and black. I painted swirling patterns that grew denser toward the center of the page. The vortex of fear and shock that had consumed me when I first heard the word malignant. "Now," Elena continued after we had all created our first piece, "choose colors that represent how you feel today, in this moment." For this second painting, I reached for different colors, green, purple, and traces of gold. The strokes were more deliberate, the composition more balanced. When Elena invited us to share, I found myself saying, "The first painting is suffocation. The second is possibility." Elena nodded encouragingly. "That's a powerful evolution, Rebecca." A woman named Diane, her head covered with a colorful scarf that signaled she was still in active treatment, studied my paintings. "I hope I get to possibility someday," she said quietly. "Right now I'm still drowning in red and black." I recognized the look in her eyes, the terror, the isolation, the desperate hope for a future beyond illness. Without thinking, I reached out and squeezed her hand. "You will," I promised. "It doesn't happen all at once, but one day you realize you're thinking about tomorrow again." After the workshop, I lingered in the garden, wandering through the meticulously maintained pathways. The careful placement of each stone, each plant, each water feature reminded me that beauty could be cultivated through intention and care, that reconstruction after devastation was possible. I took photos of particular views that spoke to me, planning to use them as inspiration for future paintings. As I was leaving, I spotted Elena near the exit. She smiled warmly. "I noticed you stayed after the session. Did you find it helpful?" "More than I expected," I admitted. "I've spent so long focusing on medical treatments and physical symptoms. I hadn't realized how much emotional processing I've been avoiding." Elena nodded knowingly. "The body keeps the score, as they say. Trauma lives in us physically until we find ways to release it." "My oncologist suggested therapy," I told her. "But traditional talk therapy feels, I don't know, too direct somehow." "Art creates a buffer," Elena agreed. "A space where we can approach difficult truths obliquely when facing them head-on might be too overwhelming." She hesitated before adding, "The workshop is just one avenue. I also work with clients individually if that might interest you." I took her card, promising to think about it. On the drive home, I realized I felt lighter than I had in months, as if the colors and shapes on paper had somehow drawn out some of the heaviness I'd been carrying. That night, I dreamed of Daniel, for the first time since he had left. In the dream, he was standing in our bedroom packing a suitcase, while I sat on the bed watching him. "Why didn't you tell me you were leaving?" I asked. Dream Daniel turned to me with a face that kept shifting, sometimes his own, sometimes a blank mask. "I told you every day," he replied. "You just weren't listening." I woke at 3 a.m., the dream still vivid. There was a kernel of truth in it that I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. The signs of Daniel's detachment had been there long before my diagnosis. The late nights at work, the distracted conversations, the declining intimacy. Cancer hadn't created the fractures in our marriage. It had merely applied pressure to existing fault lines until they cracked completely. I got up and made myself tea, then sat at the kitchen table with my journal. I wrote about the dream, about the art therapy session, about the conversation with James. As I wrote, a pattern emerged, a theme of seeing clearly what had previously been obscured, of recognizing truths that had always been present, but that I had chosen to ignore. The following Tuesday, I received an email from Daniel. "Rebecca, I've been thinking about our conversation at the cancer center. I didn't express myself well. I'd like another chance to talk, perhaps over coffee someplace neutral. There are matters related to the divorce that we never fully resolved. Daniel." I forwarded the email to Stephanie before responding. "Daniel, any matters related to the divorce should be addressed through our attorneys. I have nothing further to discuss with you directly. Rebecca." His reply came within minutes. "It's not about legal matters exactly. It's about loose ends, things we never properly closed. Please, Rebecca." One conversation. I didn't respond. Instead, I called the insurance company again, confirming that they had placed a note on my policy restricting information access solely to me. I also scheduled an appointment with a security company to install cameras at my home. The representative asked if I had specific concerns. "Just general safety," I said, unwilling to verbalize the unease I felt about Daniel's persistence. Saying it aloud, that I feared my ex-husband might have designs on my insurance policy, seemed paranoid, melodramatic. Yet Nathan's warning echoed. In my mind, desperate people make desperate choices. That Friday evening, I arrived home from my first week back at work to find Daniel sitting on my front porch. My heart raced as I pulled into the driveway, but I forced myself to remain outwardly calm as I gathered my bag and exited the car. "You shouldn't be here," I said, stopping several feet away from the steps. Daniel stood, hands spread in a gesture of openness. "You wouldn't answer my emails or calls? I needed to see you." "No, you don't need to see me. You want something from me. There's a difference." I remained where I was, maintaining distance. "What do you want, Daniel?" He sighed heavily. "Can we at least go inside? Having this conversation on your front lawn seems unnecessary. I'm not comfortable having you in my house. Say what you came to say, then leave." His expression hardened slightly at my refusal. "Fine. I've been reviewing our financial situation since the divorce, and I realized we never properly addressed the insurance policies. Given everything that's happened, I think we should discuss whether the current arrangements still make sense." There it was, the real reason for his sudden interest in reconciliation, for his brother's concern. "The insurance policies were never part of the divorce settlement," I replied evenly. "As separate property, they remain under individual control." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "So you've already looked into this?" "I have. And there's nothing to discuss. My policy remains my property to manage as I see fit." He took a step toward me, his voice lowering. "Rebecca, be reasonable. We were married for 15 years. Those policies were taken out during our marriage, with the explicit purpose of providing for each other if something happened." "Yes," I agreed. "They were. And then you left me in the middle of cancer treatment. You chose Vanessa and a new life. You forfeited any claim to provisions meant for a spouse." Daniel's face flushed with anger. "So that's it? You changed the beneficiary out of spite?" "I changed the beneficiary to protect my mother, who, unlike you, stood by me through the worst experience of my life." I took a deliberate step back. "I'm asking you to leave now, Daniel. If you have further financial concerns, direct them to Stephanie." "This isn't over," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "Those policies were established during our marriage. There's a case to be made." "Make it then," I interrupted. "Take it to court if you wish. Explain to a judge how you abandoned your wife during cancer treatment, moved in with another woman, and now believe you're entitled to profit from my death. See how that goes for you." He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked stiffly to his car without another word. I waited until he had driven away before approaching my house, my legs suddenly shaky with the aftermath of adrenaline. Inside, I leaned against the closed door, breathing deeply until my heart rate normalized. Then I called Stephanie and Nathan in quick succession, reporting the encounter. Both expressed concern about Daniel's persistence. "Document everything," Stephanie advised. "Dates, times, what was said. If he shows up again unexpectedly, call the police." "He's not violent," I protested. "Just desperate." "Desperation can lead people to cross boundaries they normally wouldn't," Stephanie pointed out. "Better to be cautious." Nathan was more direct. "I'm sorry about this, Rebecca. I'll talk to him. Make it clear he needs to back off. This isn't okay." I thanked them both, then made myself dinner and tried to settle into a normal Friday evening routine. But the encounter had left me unsettled, not just because of Daniel's obvious fixation on the insurance policy, but because of something else I had seen in his eyes, a genuine bewilderment that I wasn't yielding to his needs as I always had before. That night, I attended my regular Cancer Castaways meeting. The group had evolved as some members moved into remission while others, sadly, had experienced recurrence or progression. New faces joined periodically, bringing fresh pain, but also fresh perspective. Tonight, a woman named Tessa was attending for the first time, her head wrapped in a colorful scarf, her eyes still shell-shocked from what was clearly a recent diagnosis. "My fiancé is trying," she said when it was her turn to share. "He comes to appointments, he asks questions, but I can feel him pulling away. The wedding's been postponed indefinitely. He says it's to give me time to heal, but I wonder if he's creating an exit strategy. The words hit close to home. How many times had I rationalized Daniel's increasing distance in the early days of my diagnosis? How many times had I made excuses for his absences, his distraction, his emotional withdrawal? Trust your instincts, I found myself saying. If something feels wrong, pay attention to that feeling. Don't dismiss it. Lisa, who had been with the group since before my joining, nodded agreement. When my ex started sleeping in the guest room, he claimed it was to avoid disturbing me. It sounded considerate. It wasn't. It was the beginning of his departure. But not everyone leaves, Mark interjected. My ex disappeared, but my brother stepped up in ways I never could have anticipated. Sometimes the people who stay surprise you as much as the people who go. That night, driving home from the meeting, I reflected on Mark's words. Daniel had left, yes, but so many others had stayed. My mother, who had essentially moved in for months. Olivia, who had organized a support network. James, who had protected my professional interests. Even Nathan, who had warned me about his own brother's questionable intentions. Cancer and betrayal had stripped away the facade of my marriage, revealing its hollow core. But they had also stress-tested my other relationships, showing which connections were truly resilient. The disease that had nearly killed me had also, paradoxically, shown me how to truly live, surrounded by authentic love rather than empty promises. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a package on the front porch. My new security cameras had been scheduled for installation the following week, so I approached cautiously, half expecting another unwanted visit from Daniel. But the porch was empty save for the package, a flat square box with no postage or shipping label, just my name written in unfamiliar handwriting. I brought it inside but didn't open it immediately. Instead, I called Olivia. Someone left a package at my door, I explained. No shipping information, just my name handwritten. That's weird, Olivia agreed. Are you thinking it might be from Daniel? I don't know. It doesn't look like his handwriting. Do you want me to come over? Tim's on night shift, so I'm free. 20 minutes later, Olivia arrived. We examined the package together, eventually deciding to open it. Inside was a book, The Cancer Journals by Audre Lorde, and a handwritten note. Rebecca, I heard you speak at the Castaways meeting last month. Your words about rebuilding after betrayal gave me courage when I needed it most. I thought this book might speak to you as it did to me. With gratitude, Claire. Who's Claire? Olivia asked, examining the note. I'm not sure, I admitted. So many people come through that group. The meetings can get emotional. Sometimes I don't even register. Everyone's names? Olivia handed me the book. Well, whoever she is, she was moved by you. That's something, isn't it? That even in the middle of your own struggle, you're helping others. I turned the book over in my hands, touched by the unexpected connection. Cancer had taken so much from me, but it had also given me a community I would never otherwise have found, people who understood the particular alchemy of fear, pain, resilience, and hope that defined the cancer experience. The security system was installed on Wednesday, cameras positioned to cover all entry points to the house, with alerts sent directly to my phone. The technician, a woman named Dina with efficient hands and a reassuring demeanor, walked me through the system's features. You can check the feeds from anywhere, she explained, demonstrating on my phone. And the motion sensors will alert you to any activity. I didn't tell her why I really wanted the system, that my ex-husband's sudden interest in my life insurance policy had left me uneasy. Instead, I simply nodded and thanked her for the thorough explanation. That evening, I tested the system repeatedly, watching the alerts ping on my phone as I deliberately triggered the motion sensors. There was something comforting about the technology, about knowing I would have warning if Daniel decided to make another unexpected visit. My radiation treatments began the following week. 5 days a week for 6 weeks, I would lie perfectly, still on a cold table while invisible beams targeted the remaining cancer cells in my body. The procedure itself was painless, but the cumulative effects, fatigue, skin irritation, occasional nausea, built up over time. Unlike chemotherapy, which had left me debilitated for days after each session, radiation allowed me to maintain some semblance of normal life. I continued working 3 days a week at Pacific Northwest Financial, gradually rebuilding my client relationships and professional confidence. James continued to be an unexpected source of support, covering for me when fatigue hit mid-afternoon, bringing me specially blended teas that helped with radiation-induced nausea, checking in without being intrusive. "My sister went through this 5 years ago," he explained when I finally asked about his exceptional understanding. "I learned a lot during her treatment. Our professional relationship evolved into a friendship of sorts, cautious on both sides, but genuine. We were both aware of the potential complications, both recently out of long-term relationships, both focused primarily on our careers. But there was a comfort in our interactions, a natural rhythm that required no artifice. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult meeting with clients concerned about market volatility, James appeared at my office door with 2 cups of ginger tea. "You handled the Andersons beautifully," he said, placing 1 cup on my desk. "Most advisors would have panicked when Mr. Anderson started talking about pulling everything out." I smiled wearily. "Cancer gives you perspective on what constitutes a genuine crisis. Market corrections don't qualify." James settled into the chair across from my desk, studying me. "How are the treatments going? You don't have to answer, if it's too personal." "No, it's fine," I assured him. 3 weeks down, 3 to go. The fatigue is building, but it's manageable. Nothing like chemo." "And the other situation?" He was careful never to mention Daniel by name, as if speaking it might conjure him. "Quiet lately. No more surprise visits since the security system went in." I didn't add that Daniel had called twice more, leaving messages claiming he needed to discuss important financial matters. Stephanie had advised me to maintain complete non-engagement unless he attempted something through legal channels. James nodded, looking relieved. "Good. That's good." He hesitated before continuing. "Some of us are going hiking at Forest Park this weekend. Nothing strenuous, just the lower trails. Would you like to join?" I considered the invitation. My energy levels were unpredictable with radiation, but the idea of being outdoors, surrounded by trees and fresh air rather than medical equipment, was appealing. "I'd like that," I said. "Though I might have to turn back early." "We'll go at your pace," James promised. The weekend hike became a turning point of sorts. James and 3 other colleagues from Pacific Northwest, Mira from compliance, Devin from research, and Sophia from client relations, picked me up early Saturday morning. The weather was perfect, cool and clear, the forest vibrant with spring growth. We took the gentlest trail, stopping frequently to admire particularly impressive trees or unusual fungi. No one mentioned cancer or divorce or insurance policies. Instead, we talked about books we'd read, travel dreams for when the pandemic fully subsided, ridiculous client requests, and office gossip. For 3 precious hours, I was just Rebecca. Not the cancer patient, not the abandoned wife, just a woman enjoying a spring day with friends. When we stopped for lunch at a scenic overlook, Sophia pulled out a small flask of whiskey and passed it around. "To normal things," she toasted when it reached me. "To living life like it's actually worth living." "To normal things," I echoed, taking a small sip. The whiskey burned pleasantly as it went down, a reminder that my body could still experience sensations beyond pain and fatigue. I handed the flask to James, who raised it with a smile. "To Rebecca," he said simply, "who makes normal things extraordinary." The comment lingered with me long after the hike ended, after James had walked me to my door and declined my invitation to come in for coffee, citing other commitments. There had been something in his eyes when he said those words, a warmth that went beyond collegial appreciation. I wasn't ready to examine what that might mean, wasn't prepared to consider any romantic possibilities when so much of my life was still in flux. But I couldn't deny the small flutter of something like anticipation that his words had sparked. That evening, as I was reviewing my calendar for the coming week, I noticed a date circled in red, my upcoming annual mammogram and diagnostic ultrasound, the first comprehensive scan since completing treatment. Dr. Pearson had warned me not to place too much significance on this particular checkpoint. It's too soon for definitive answers, he'd cautioned. We're establishing a new baseline, that's all. But despite his warnings, I knew this scan carried enormous psychological weight. It would provide the first concrete evidence of whether the treatments were working, whether the cancer was retreating or advancing. The anxiety that had been held at bay during the pleasant activities of the weekend crashed back with suffocating intensity. What if the cancer had spread during treatment? What if the radiation wasn't working? What if, after everything I had endured, the surgery, the chemo, the radiation, the divorce, the disease still won in the end? I reached for my phone to call my mother, then hesitated. Margaret had been my rock throughout treatment, but lately I'd been trying to ease her concerns, to show her I was recovering and independent. Calling her now, in the grip of fear, would only reignite her worry. Instead, I opened the book Claire had left on my doorstep, Audre Lorde's The Cancer Journals. The struggle with cancer now informs all my days, Lorde had written, but it is only another face of that continuing battle for self-determination and survival that Black women fight daily, often in triumph. The words resonated deeply. My battle with cancer was indeed a struggle for self-determination and survival. Not just physical survival, but survival of the self I was becoming, the woman who had emerged from the chrysalis of illness and betrayal. I read until my eyes grew heavy, finding solace in Lorde's fierce honesty about fear, pain, and the determination to live fully despite them. The morning of the scan, I woke before dawn. Sleep had been fitful, punctuated by dreams of drowning, of being lost in labyrinthine hospitals, of Daniel standing over me with a life insurance policy in his hand. I made coffee and sat in my garden as the sky lightened, watching hummingbirds dart among the fuchsias I'd planted after Daniel left. Their iridescent feathers caught the early light as they hovered, impossibly delicate yet remarkably resilient. Olivia picked me up at 9, her presence a comfort as we drove to the imaging center. She had taken the day off specifically to accompany me, understanding the significance of this particular appointment. Whatever the results, she said as we pulled into the parking lot, we face it together. You're not alone in this. The mammogram itself was familiar, uncomfortable but not unbearable. The ultrasound that followed was similarly routine, the technician maintaining professional neutrality as she moved the wand over my remaining breast and the reconstructed area where my left breast had been. When both procedures were complete, I was told to wait for Dr. Pearson, who would review the results immediately. The waiting room was quiet, just Olivia and me and an elderly couple seated near the door. I flipped through magazines without seeing the pages, while Olivia chatted about her upcoming wedding plans, a transparent attempt to distract me that I appreciated nonetheless. When a nurse finally called my name, Olivia squeezed my hand. Want me to come in with you? I shook my head. I need to hear this on my own, but thank you. Dr. Pearson was at his desk when I entered his office, the scan images displayed on his computer screen. He looked up with a smile that immediately released some of the tension in my chest. The images look good, Rebecca. Really good. I sank into the chair opposite him, suddenly lightheaded with relief. No new growth? No new growth, he confirmed, and the previously affected areas show significant improvement. The aggressive treatment protocol was the right choice. Tears sprang to my eyes, surprising me. I had been so focused on enduring treatment, on navigating the practical aspects of life post-Daniel, that I had barely allowed myself to consider the possibility of genuine recovery. So, what does this mean going forward? It means we continue with the radiation as planned, and then move to the hormone therapy we discussed. It means your prognosis is very favorable. Dr. Pearson leaned forward, his expression earnest. Rebecca, this is very good news. Not a guarantee, we never offer those, but a strong indication that you're responding well to treatment. I nodded, wiping away tears. Thank you. There's something else I wanted to discuss, Dr. Pearson continued. Our cancer center is developing a peer support program for newly diagnosed patients. Given how well you've navigated your own journey, despite significant personal challenges, I think you'd be an excellent mentor. Would that interest you? The offer touched me deeply. Throughout my treatment, I had benefited from the wisdom and support of those further along the cancer path. The idea of offering that same guidance to others felt right, a way to transform my suffering into something meaningful. I'd be honored, I said. Once radiation is complete, I'd like to help however I can. When I emerged from Dr. Pearson's office, Olivia took one look at my face and jumped up. Good news? She asked, her voice hopeful. I nodded, and she enveloped me in a careful hug, mindful of my radiation-sensitive skin. Let's celebrate, she declared. Lunch at Harper's. Harper's was a small bistro near the river, known for its excellent seafood and extensive wine list. Under normal circumstances, I would have jumped at the suggestion. But radiation had altered my taste buds and reduced my appetite significantly. Maybe just coffee, I suggested. I'm not very hungry. Olivia studied my face. You need to eat something, Beck, even if it's just soup. Doctor's orders. I smiled at her maternal tone. Fine, soup at Harper's, but no wine for me. I have a meeting with Stephanie this afternoon. Over a bowl of butternut squash soup that tasted mostly of nothing, another radiation side effect, I shared Dr. Pearson's invitation to become a peer mentor. Olivia was enthusiastic. You'd be amazing at that. You're already doing it informally, with the Castaways group. It feels like the right next step, I agreed. Using what I've learned to help others navigate their own diagnosis. Speaking of next steps, Olivia said carefully, Tim and I were talking last night. We want you to be our witness at the wedding, not a formal bridesmaid. I know you hate those dresses, just the legal witness. Would you consider it? I was touched by the request. Of course. I'd be honored. Good. She looked relieved. And we were also wondering if you might consider bringing a +1. No pressure, but Tim mentioned that James from your office has been especially supportive lately. I nearly choked on my spoonful of soup. James is a colleague and friend, nothing more. Olivia raised an eyebrow. Tim says he looks at you like you hang the moon. Tim is a hopeless romantic who thinks everyone should be paired up, I retorted. Besides, I'm hardly in a position to start dating. I'm still in active treatment, still legally divorced for less than a year, still dealing with Daniel's periodic attempts to contact me. All valid points, Olivia conceded. But cancer doesn't mean your life stops, Beck. Neither does divorce. At some point, you get to move forward, to want things again, including companionship if that's what you decide you want. Her words stayed with me as I drove to Stephanie's office later that afternoon. Was I ready to consider dating again? The very idea seemed absurd on one level. My body was still ravaged by treatment, my emotions still raw from betrayal. And yet, there was no denying the small spark of interest I felt when James looked at me with that particular warmth, the flutter of something like possibility when our conversations extended beyond work topics. Stephanie greeted me with her usual efficient warmth, ushering me into her sleek office with its panoramic views of downtown Portland. "Good news at the scan today?" she asked as we settled into the comfortable leather chairs near the window. "Very good news," I confirmed. "No new growth, significant improvement in previously affected areas." "Excellent." She smiled genuinely. "You deserve some good news, Rebecca." "Is there news on the legal front as well?" I asked. "Your message mentioned developments." Stephanie's expression became more serious. "Yes. Daniel's attorney contacted me yesterday. He's making inquiries about the life insurance policy, specifically about when the beneficiary was changed." My stomach tightened. "What exactly is he asking?" "He wants documentation of when the change was made, claiming it might constitute a violation of community property principles if it occurred before the legal separation." Stephanie's tone was matter-of-fact, but I could see concern in her eyes. "That's absurd," I said. "The policy is in my name. I've always been the owner." "And that's precisely what I told them," Stephanie assured me. "But I wanted you to be aware that Daniel is pursuing this angle. It suggests he's not going to drop the matter easily." I sat back, processing this information. "What are his chances of success?" "Minimal," Stephanie said firmly. "The legal precedent is clear. As the owner of the policy, you have the right to change beneficiaries at any time. The timing relative to your separation might be relevant if the policy were a shared asset, but it's not. It's yours alone. So why pursue it at all?" Stephanie sighed. "Based on what you've told me about his financial situation, he's desperate. People grasp at straws when they're drowning. But I also suspect there's an element of control at play. This gives him a reason to maintain contact, to continue inserting himself into your life." The observation resonated uncomfortably. Throughout our marriage, Daniel had exerted control in subtle ways, managing our finances, making major decisions, subtly steering my choices while maintaining the illusion of equal partnership. Even now, with legal ties severed, he was finding ways to assert influence over my life. "What's our next step?" "We respond with the facts," Stephanie said simply. "The policy is yours. The beneficiary change was legal and appropriate. End of discussion. If they continue to press, we can seek a cease and desist order." I nodded, grateful for her clear-headed approach. "I just want this to be over, Stephanie. I want to focus on healing, on building a new life, not constantly looking over my shoulder for Daniel's next move." "I understand," she said gently. "And we'll get there. For now, continue documenting any contact from Daniel. Keep the security system active. And try to focus on the positive developments in your life, your improving health, your work, your friends." As I drove home from Stephanie's office, I found myself taking a detour, turning toward Washington Park rather than heading directly home. The Japanese garden would be open for another hour, and I suddenly craved its tranquility, its ordered beauty. The art therapy sessions there had become a touchstone for me, a space where I could process the complex emotions of cancer and divorce through color and form rather than words. The garden was quiet in the late afternoon, just a few visitors wandering the meandering paths or sitting in contemplation beside the koi pond. I found a secluded bench and sat, breathing in the scent of moss and water and spring flowers. A light rain had fallen earlier, leaving droplets on the perfectly pruned shrubs and creating a luminous quality to the air. I hadn't brought my sketchbook, but I took out my phone and captured images of particular views that spoke to me. A twisted pine bonsai whose resilience in the face of artificial constraints seemed especially poignant. A careful arrangement of stones in a dry creek bed that suggested movement and permanence simultaneously. These would become references for future paintings, ways to carry the garden's serenity back into the more chaotic aspects of my life. As I was photographing a particularly striking maple tree, its leaves backlit by the lowering sun, a voice spoke nearby. The Japanese call that komorebi, the light that filters through leaves. I turned to see Elena, the art therapist, standing a few feet away, a professional camera hanging around her neck. I didn't know there was a specific word for it, I replied. It's beautiful. Japanese has many words for natural phenomena that English lacks, she said, moving closer. It's one of the things I love about the language, its precision in describing beauty. She gestured to the bench beside me. May I? I nodded, and she sat, her camera cradled in her lap. I come here often between client sessions, she explained. It centers me. I can understand that, I said. There's something about this place that quiets the mind. Elena nodded. That's intentional in the design. Every element is placed to create harmony, to guide the visitor toward contemplation, rather than distraction. She studied me for a moment. You seem lighter today than at our last workshop. Good news? My scan results were positive, I confirmed. The treatments appear to be working. I'm glad to hear it, she said warmly. Those milestones are significant. I remember my own. I looked at her with surprise. You've had cancer? Ovarian, 10 years ago, she said simply. Stage 3, aggressive treatment, uncertain outcome, much like your journey, from what you've shared in the group. This revelation shifted something in my perception of Elena. I had assumed her understanding came from professional training, not personal experience. Is that why you became an art therapist? She smiled. Partly. I was already an artist, but the cancer experience showed me how powerful creative expression could be in processing trauma. I went back to school after recovery and specialized in working with patients facing serious illness. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both watching the play of light through the trees. Did you lose people during your illness? I finally asked. People you thought would stay? Elena considered the question. Yes and no. My husband remained physically present but emotionally absent. We divorced 2 years after my treatment ended, not because of the cancer directly, but because it revealed fundamental incompatibilities in how we faced crisis. Some friends disappeared, unable to handle the reminder of mortality. Others showed up in ways I never expected. She turned to face me. The sorting of relationships is one of cancer's hidden processes. Painful, but clarifying. Clarifying, I repeated. That's exactly it. Everything unnecessary falls away. Including parts of ourselves, Elena added. The accommodations we made, the compromises, the careful facades we maintained. Cancer strips all that away. The final weeks of radiation treatment coincided with the beginning of summer. Portland came alive with lush greenery and vibrant blooms, days stretching longer as the solstice approached. I developed a routine that accommodated both my medical needs and my gradual return to normalcy. Radiation sessions in the mornings, work at Pacific Northwest Financial 3 afternoons a week, art therapy on Wednesdays, cancer castaways meetings on Thursdays. The predictable rhythm provided structure as my body healed and my spirit recalibrated to this new phase of life. My radiation oncologist, Dr. Lawrence, was pleased with my progress. The skin reaction is minimal, she observed. During one of my final appointments, examining the treated area with clinical detachment. And your blood work shows improving immune function. You're responding exceptionally well. Does that mean the cancer is gone? I asked, always returning to the fundamental question that haunted every patient. Dr. Lawrence's expression softened. In medicine, we rarely use the word gone with cancer. We prefer terms like no evidence of disease or complete response to treatment. But yes, based on your most recent imaging and your response to the combined therapies, I'm very optimistic about your prognosis. I nodded, accepting this qualified good news for what it was, the best possible outcome at this stage of my journey. And after radiation? What then? You'll continue hormone therapy for 5 years with regular monitoring. Dr. Pearson will oversee that phase of your treatment. She made a final note in my chart. Just 3 more sessions, Rebecca. You're nearly there. Nearly there. The phrase echoed in my mind as I drove to work that afternoon. Nearly there. But where, exactly? The intense focus on treatment had narrowed my vision to the immediate challenges of survival. As those challenges receded, larger questions emerged. What did recovery actually look like? Who was I now, post-cancer, post-Daniel? What kind of life did I want to build from the ruins of my previous existence? At Pacific Northwest Financial, I found myself drawn to projects that felt meaningful rather than merely profitable. I began specializing in retirement planning for women facing major life transitions, divorce, widowhood, career changes. My own experience had highlighted how vulnerable women could be during these periods, how critical financial independence was to genuine autonomy. James supported this shift in my client focus, often referring suitable clients my way. The Mercer case would be perfect for you, he said one afternoon, stopping by my office with the file. Recently widowed, significant assets, but minimal financial experience. She needs someone who understands both the numbers and the emotional component. I took the file, grateful for his confidence in my abilities. Thanks. I'll review it tonight and reach out to her tomorrow. James lingered in the doorway. Few of us are getting dinner at Renata after work. Would you like to join? The invitation wasn't unusual. James had been including me in social activities with increasing frequency, but something in his tone made me look up from the file. He seemed slightly nervous, his usual professional composure momentarily disrupted. Who's a few of us? I asked. He hesitated. Actually, it would just be me. I thought perhaps. Well, it might be nice to talk outside of work, but I understand if you're not interested or it's not a good time. The realization that James was asking me on a date, not a group outing, not a collegial dinner, but an actual date, caught me off guard. I had been aware of the subtle shift in our relationship, the growing warmth between us that transcended professional courtesy. But I hadn't expected him to act on it, nor had I fully examined my own readiness for such a step. James, I paused, gathering my thoughts. I'm flattered, truly. But my life is still very complicated. The cancer treatments, the ongoing situation with Daniel, the emotional aftermath of everything that's happened. I'm not sure I'm in a place where I can offer anyone the kind of attention a relationship deserves. He nodded, his expression understanding rather than disappointed. I respect that completely. And to be clear, I'm not proposing anything dramatic. Just dinner, conversation, the chance to know each other better outside these walls. He gestured to the office around us. No pressure, no expectations. Just 2 people who enjoy each other's company. Put that way, it seemed both simpler and more appealing. When was the last time I had enjoyed a meal with someone who saw me as a woman, not a patient or a victim or a professional colleague? When had I last engaged in conversation untethered from cancer statistics or divorce proceedings or financial strategies? Dinner sounds nice, I said finally. But perhaps not Renata. The upscale Italian restaurant had been a favorite of Daniel's, the site of several anniversary celebrations during our marriage. Somewhere new might be better. James smiled, relieved. I know a great Thai place on Division Street. Small, quiet, excellent food. Would that work? That sounds perfect. That evening, as I stood before my closet considering what to wear, I felt a strange combination of anxiety and excitement. It had been years, literally years, since I had dressed. For a first date. My body had changed significantly since then, marked by surgery and treatment. My hair was still growing back, a soft silver cap rather than the long auburn waves Daniel had admired. My energy levels remained unpredictable, my confidence in social situations tentative after months of relative isolation. I settled on a simple dress in deep teal, a color that had always suited me, paired with a lightweight cashmere wrap to guard against the restaurant's air conditioning. Minimal makeup, my skin was still sensitive from radiation, and simple silver earrings completed the look. The woman who gazed back from the mirror was different from the one who had entered marriage with Daniel 15 years earlier. Older, certainly, but also somehow more essential, stripped of pretense by illness and betrayal. James was waiting outside the restaurant when I arrived, casually elegant in charcoal slacks and a light blue shirt. His smile when he saw me was warm, but not overly familiar, striking the perfect note for this tentative first step beyond collegiality. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you." I was surprised by the hint of shyness I felt, like a much younger woman on a first date. "So do you." The restaurant was exactly as James had described, intimate without being romantic, quiet, enough for conversation but with enough ambient noise to provide privacy. We were seated in a corner booth, far enough from other diners to speak freely. "I've never actually seen you outside the office environment," James observed as we studied the menus. "It suits you." I smiled at the compliment. "It feels strange, to be honest. Good strange, but still strange." "Strange how?" "Like I'm remembering how to be a person again, not just a patient or a professional or an ex-wife." I set down the menu, deciding on a simple pad thai. For so long, every interaction has been defined by cancer or divorce or work. This feels normal. I'd almost forgotten what normal feels like. James nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Recovery isn't just physical, is it?" "Not even close. The physical part is just the beginning." I paused as the server arrived to take our orders, then continued once we were alone again. "There's a whole process of reclaiming yourself afterward, of figuring out who you are when you're not actively fighting for survival." "And who are you discovering yourself to be?" James asked, his interest genuine rather than perfunctory. The question gave me pause. Who was I now? "I'm still working that out," I admitted. "But I know I'm stronger than I realized, more resilient, less willing to compromise on what matters to me, and far less patient with inauthentic relationships." "Those sound like valuable discoveries." "They came at a high cost," I said quietly. "But yes, they're valuable." Our food arrived, steaming, and fragrant. As we ate, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Books we'd recently read, James's newfound interest in kayaking, a documentary series on architecture that had captured my attention during long recovery evenings. The ease between us surprised me. There were no awkward silences, no careful avoidance of difficult subjects, just the natural flow of two people genuinely interested in each other's thoughts and experiences. Dessert was sticky rice with mango, shared between us as James told me about his own failed marriage years earlier. "We married too young," he explained. "Right out of college, before either of us really knew who we were or what we wanted from life. By the time we figured it out, we'd grown in completely different directions." "Do you regret it?" I asked. "The marriage, I mean." James considered the question thoughtfully. "I regret the pain we caused each other as things fell apart. But the marriage itself? No. It was part of my journey, part of what shaped me. And we parted as friends, which I'm grateful for." "That's more than I can say for my situation," I said, finding I could speak of Daniel without the sharp sting of betrayal that had once accompanied his name, though I'm reaching a point where I'm almost grateful for how it ended. James looked surprised. "Grateful?" If Daniel had remained, reluctantly, resentfully, out of obligation, I might never have discovered my own strength. I might have continued compromising, continued accepting less than I deserved, continued believing that his approval was necessary for my worth. I took a sip of tea, letting the warm spices linger on my tongue. His leaving forced me to stand on my own feet, to rebuild my life according to my own values rather than our shared illusion. That's quite a perspective shift, James observed. Cancer changes how you see everything, I said simply. It burns away the non-essential. As the evening concluded, James walked me to my car. The summer twilight lingered, painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold. We stood beside my vehicle, that moment of first-date uncertainty hanging between us. I enjoyed this, James said. Very much. So did I replied honestly. It was nice to remember that life isn't all medical appointments and legal documents. He smiled, then asked carefully, "Would it be all right if I called you this weekend? Perhaps we could do something outdoors, take advantage of the good weather." The question was purposefully open-ended, offering connection without pressure, companionship without expectation. It was exactly what I needed at this juncture, the possibility of something new without the demand for immediate definition or commitment. "I'd like that," I said. He leaned forward slowly, telegraphing his intentions, giving me ample opportunity to step away. But I remained still as he placed a gentle kiss on my cheek, brief and respectful. "Good night, Rebecca." "Good night, James." Driving home, I was surprised by the lightness I felt. The evening had been pleasant, comfortable, promising in an understated way. But more significantly, it represented a step toward reclaiming normal, human interaction, toward believing that life continued beyond illness and betrayal. Whether anything more developed with James remained to be seen, but the simple fact that I could enjoy a dinner, a conversation, a moment of connection felt like victory. I was unlocking my front door when my phone buzzed with a text message. Expecting it might be James, I checked the screen immediately. Instead, I saw Daniel's name, sending a jolt of unwelcome adrenaline through my system. "Need to discuss insurance situation urgently. My lawyer says we have a strong case for policy reversion. Can we meet tomorrow?" The message was like a bucket of cold water after the warmth of the evening with James. I did not respond, following Stephanie's advice about maintaining non-engagement. But the intrusion soured my mood, reminding me that despite my progress, despite the positive scan results and the pleasant dinner and the gradual rebuilding of my life, Daniel remained a persistent shadow at the edges of my existence. Inside, I went through my evening routine, medication, gentle stretching exercises recommended by my radiation oncologist, herbal tea to help with sleep. I had just settled into bed with a book when my phone rang. Not Daniel this time, but Olivia. "Did I wake you?" she asked when I answered. "No, just reading. Everything okay?" "Yes and no." Olivia sounded hesitant, unusual for her typically direct personality. "Tim ran into Daniel at the hospital today." My stomach tightened. Daniel was at the hospital? Why? Apparently for tests of some kind. Tim didn't get details, patient confidentiality, but Daniel looked unwell. "Tim thought you should know." I processed this information slowly. Daniel seeking medical care, looking unwell. It could be anything from a routine physical to something more serious. Why did I need to know this? What was I supposed to do with this information? "Thanks for letting me know," I said finally, "but I'm not sure what difference it makes to me at this point." "I understand," Olivia assured me. I thought you'd want to know, given everything." After we hung up, I stared at the ceiling, sleep suddenly elusive. Daniel's health concerns were no longer my responsibility. He had Vanessa, or had, until their recent breakup. He had family, friends, colleagues who could support him through whatever medical issues he might be facing. I had been explicitly removed from that role when he walked out during my cancer treatment. And yet, there was a twinge of something like concern, like the echo of care that had once been automatic. 15 years of marriage didn't disappear entirely, even after betrayal. I remembered the early days when Daniel had been genuinely kind, genuinely supportive. I remembered nursing him through a severe case of pneumonia our 3rd year together, remembered his vulnerability during that illness, how it had deepened our connection. I shook my head, dispelling the memories. Compassion was one thing. Re-entanglement was another. Whatever Daniel was facing, it wasn't my burden to carry. My focus needed to remain on my own healing, my own recovery, my own future. The following morning brought my second-to-last radiation session. As I lay on the treatment table, the massive machine rotating silently around me, I thought about the cycles of illness and health, of connection and separation, that had defined the past year of my life. Soon, this particular phase would end. The daily visits to the cancer center would be replaced by monthly checkups, then quarterly, then semi-annual. Life would expand beyond the boundaries of treatment rooms and medication schedules. After the session, I stopped by Dr. Pearson's office for our scheduled appointment. He greeted me warmly, his desk uncharacteristically clear of files. "Almost there," he said as I settled into the chair opposite him. "How are you feeling about concluding active treatment?" "Relieved," I said honestly, "but also a little anxious. There's a strange security in the structure of treatment, in the constant monitoring. Once that ends..." "The surveillance continues," he reminded me. "Just less intensively, and the hormone therapy provides ongoing protection." "I know, it's not entirely rational, this anxiety." Dr. Pearson nodded understandingly. "It's actually extremely common. We call it transition anxiety, the fear that arises when moving from active treatment to survivorship. Many patients describe feeling as if they're being sent out without a safety net." "That's exactly it," I agreed, relieved that my feelings had a name, that they were normal rather than a personal failing. Like I've been holding my breath for months, and now I'm supposed to breathe normally again, but I've forgotten how. "The peer mentor program we discussed might help with that transition," Dr. Pearson suggested. "Supporting others through their acute treatment phase can provide purpose while you navigate your own adjustment to survivorship." We discussed the logistics of the program, the training involved, the time commitment, the screening process to match mentors with appropriate mentees. By the time I left his office, I had committed to beginning mentor training the following month, once my radiation treatment was complete and I'd had a short recovery period. As I walked through the hospital lobby toward the parking garage, a familiar figure caught my eye. Daniel was sitting in the central waiting area, flipping through a magazine without appearing to actually read it. He looked thinner than I remembered, his normally vibrant complexion ashen beneath his summer tan. For a moment, I considered simply walking past, pretending not to have seen him. But before I could implement this plan, he looked up and our eyes met. There was no avoiding the encounter now. I approached, maintaining what felt like a safe emotional distance. "Daniel," I said, my tone neutral. He set aside the magazine, straightening slightly in his chair. "Rebecca, you look well." "Thank you." I declined to return the compliment, since it would have been insincere. "Olivia mentioned you were here for tests." His expression tightened at this evidence that my social circle was aware of his medical situation. "Nothing serious," he said dismissively. "Routine follow-up." I nodded, not believing him, but also not invested enough to press for truth. We stood in awkward silence for a moment before Daniel spoke again. "Did you get my text? About the insurance?" So that was his real interest. Not a coincidental meeting, but a deliberate one, using his presence at the hospital as an opportunity to circumvent my careful boundaries. I did, I replied coolly. And as I've said before, any legal matters should be addressed through our attorneys. This doesn't have to be a legal battle, Rebecca. His tone turned conciliatory, reasonable. We could reach an agreement between ourselves. There's nothing to agree on. The policy is mine. The beneficiary is my choice. Daniel leaned forward, his expression earnest. Look, I know things ended badly between us. I made mistakes. Serious ones. I'm not denying that. But 15 years together has to count for something. That policy was taken out during our marriage, with the intention of providing for each other. Yes, I agreed. And then you left me during cancer treatment. You moved in with another woman. You made it very clear that my welfare was no longer your concern. I kept my voice low but firm. You can't abandon those responsibilities and then expect to retain the benefits. His face flushed with anger or embarrassment, perhaps both. It wasn't that simple, and you know it. Our marriage was struggling long before your diagnosis. Which makes your timing all the more revealing, I observed. Most people don't leave their spouses at their most vulnerable, regardless of pre-existing marital problems. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I recognized from countless arguments during our marriage. I'm not here to rehash the divorce. I'm trying to resolve this insurance issue reasonably. There's nothing to resolve. I stepped back, indicating that the conversation was concluding. The policy belongs to me. The beneficiary is my choice. If you want to pursue this legally, you're welcome to try, but my attorney assures me your position has no merit. Your attorney, Daniel scoffed. Of course she would say that. She's being paid to tell you what you want to hear. I might once have been baited by this dismissal, might have engaged in a circular argument about legal interpretations and moral obligations. But that was the old Rebecca, the woman who sought Daniel's approval, who believed compromise meant capitulation, who prioritized harmony over self-respect. Goodbye, Daniel, I said simply, turning toward the exit. This isn't over, he called after me, loud enough that several people in the lobby turned to look. I kept walking, not turning back, not giving him the satisfaction of a response. Outside, in the bright summer sunshine, I took a deep breath, letting the clean air fill my lungs. Daniel's desperation was becoming increasingly evident and increasingly concerning. Stephanie had been right to suggest heightened security measures and careful documentation of all interactions. Back home, I called Stephanie and reported the encounter in clinical detail, where it had occurred, what had been said, Daniel's demeanor and apparent physical condition. She took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. His persistence is troubling, she observed when I had finished my account, especially given that the legal avenues available to him are limited at best. Has he made any threatening statements or gestures? Not explicitly, I said. But there's an intensity to his focus on the insurance policy that makes me uneasy. Trust that instinct, Stephanie advised. Continue avoiding direct engagement. Maintain the security system and document everything. I'll send another formal communication to his attorney, reiterating our position and requesting that he cease personal contact with you regarding this matter. After hanging up with Stephanie, I found myself too restless to settle into my usual afternoon routine. The encounter with Daniel had disrupted my hard-won equilibrium, stirring up emotions I thought I had processed and released. I changed into workout clothes and headed to the small home gym I had set up during recovery, a yoga mat, light hand weights, and a recumbent exercise bike that allowed for gentle cardio without overexertion. Physical movement had become essential to my recovery, both physical and emotional. The careful strength training recommended by my medical team helped rebuild muscle mass lost during treatment. The meditative aspects of yoga provided space to process complex emotions, and the simple act of breaking a sweat, of feeling my heart rate increase and my muscles engage, reminded me that I was alive, healing, reclaiming my body after months of medical invasion. I was midway through a gentle yoga sequence when my phone chimed with a text message. I almost ignored it, not wanting another interruption from Daniel. But a glance at the screen showed it was from James. "Hope your day is going well. Still interested in that outdoor activity this weekend? Forest Park has a new installation of environmental sculptures that might be worth exploring." The message was perfectly timed, pulling me back from the spiral of anxiety that the hospital encounter had triggered. It was a reminder that my life, now extended beyond the shadow of Daniel's demands, beyond the constraints of illness, into new possibilities and connections. "That sounds perfect," I texted back. "Sunday afternoon?" "Sunday it is," James replied. "I'll bring a picnic if you bring your artistic perspective." I smiled at the exchange, setting the phone aside to complete my yoga practice with renewed focus. The contrast between the two men could not have been more stark. Daniel with his demands and manipulations, his attempt to assert rights he had willingly abandoned. James with his respectful distance, his genuine interest, his recognition of my autonomy. Later that evening, I received an unexpected phone call from Nathan, Daniel's brother. We had maintained limited contact since the divorce, mostly his occasional check-ins regarding Daniel's more concerning behaviors, but our conversations were always brief and purposeful. "Rebecca, I'm sorry to bother you," he began without preamble. "But I'm worried about Daniel." "If this is about the insurance policy, it's not," Nathan interrupted. "Or at least not directly. It's about his health. He's been diagnosed with early-stage kidney disease. It's manageable with treatment, but it's serious, and he's not handling it well." The news landed heavily in my chest. Kidney disease would explain Daniel's changed appearance, his ashen complexion, perhaps even his increased desperation regarding financial matters. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it despite everything. "But I'm not sure why you're telling me. We're divorced, Nathan. His medical issues aren't my concern anymore." Nathan sighed. "I know. And believe me, I wouldn't involve you if I didn't think it was necessary. But he's fixated on this insurance thing, convinced it's his safety net if his condition worsens. I've tried to reason with him, explained that the policy is yours, that his claim has no legal merit, but he's not being rational about it. What exactly are you asking me to do?" I kept my tone even, though internally I was bristling at the implication that I should somehow accommodate Daniel's demands due to his illness. Had he shown me the same consideration during my cancer treatment? "Nothing specific," Nathan assured me. "I just wanted you to be aware of the situation, to understand why he's being so persistent, and to be careful. He's not in a good place mentally right now." The warning was clear, though delicately phrased. Nathan was concerned that Daniel's desperation might lead to actions more serious than unwanted texts or courthouse encounters. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. "I'll be cautious." After the call ended, I sat in my garden as twilight descended, processing this new information. Daniel's illness didn't change anything about our legal situation, about the rightful ownership of the insurance policy, about the fundamental betrayal that had ended our marriage. But it did contextualize his recent behavior, adding another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation. I thought about what Elena had said during our conversation in the Japanese garden, about cancer's clarifying effect on relationships, about the sorting process that revealed who would stand by you in crisis and who would retreat. Daniel had failed that test dramatically, abandoning me when I needed support most. Was I now obligated to show him the compassion he had denied me? Or was maintaining boundaries an equally valid form of self-care, a necessary protection for my own ongoing recovery? There were no simple answers, no clear moral imperatives. There was only the reality I had created for myself, a life rebuilding from the ruins of illness and betrayal, a careful architecture of new connections and renewed purpose. Daniel's health concerns were not irrelevant to me as a human being, who had once loved him, but neither were they my responsibility to address or resolve. As darkness fell, I made my decision. I would maintain my boundaries regarding the insurance policy and direct contact, but I would ask Stephanie to communicate with Daniel's attorney in measured, compassionate terms rather than confrontational ones. I would continue documenting interactions and maintaining security measures, but I would not engage in hostile exchanges or unnecessary legal maneuvers. I would protect what was mine without seeking to punish or humiliate Daniel, regardless of how he had treated me during my own illness. My final radiation treatment arrived on a Thursday morning. After 6 weeks of daily hospital visits, this last session felt strangely anticlimactic. The same sterile room, the same whirring machines, the same instructions to lie perfectly still. But when it was over, when I rose from the treatment table, for the final time, a profound sense of completion washed over me. The medical team had prepared a small celebration, complete with a certificate declaring me a radiation graduate, and a pink cupcake that I knew I wouldn't eat, but appreciated. Nonetheless, Dr. Lawrence shook my hand with genuine warmth. "You've been an exemplary patient, Rebecca," she said. "Strong, compliant, positive. Those qualities serve you well in recovery." I drove home in a contemplative mood, the certificate on the passenger seat beside me. The formal phase of cancer, treatment was over, but the journey of survivorship was just beginning. The hormone therapy would continue for years, the regular scans and blood tests and necessary vigilance against recurrence. Cancer would remain a part of my life story, a thread, woven through the fabric of my existence, not defining it, but never entirely absent either. At home, a bouquet of sunflowers waited on my porch, accompanied by a card from my mother. "Celebrating your strength and perseverance," she had written. "So proud of you, my darling girl." Margaret had supported me from the first devastating diagnosis through every painful treatment and emotional crisis, never wavering in her belief that I would emerge not just alive, but somehow stronger. Now, looking at her familiar handwriting, I allowed myself to believe she might be right. The weekend arrived with perfect summer weather, clear skies and gentle warmth ideal for the outdoor excursion James had proposed. We met at the Forest Park entrance near the environmental sculpture installation, James carrying a small backpack that presumably contained our picnic. He greeted me with a warm smile and a light touch on my arm, a gesture of affection that respected the careful boundaries we had established. "You're glowing," he observed as we set off along the shaded trail. "Is it the completion of treatment, or are you just happy to see me?" "Both," I admitted, surprising myself with the candor. "It feels like crossing a finish line, even though I know there's still a long road ahead." The sculpture installation was thoughtfully integrated into the natural environment. Twisted copper forms emerging from moss-covered logs, delicate glass structures suspended from tree branches, stone arrangements that seemed simultaneously ancient and contemporary. We moved slowly through the exhibit, discussing each piece, appreciating the dialogue between artistic creation and natural beauty. "This one reminds me of your description of cancer treatment," James said, pausing before a particularly striking installation, a series of broken clay vessels that had been meticulously repaired with gold lacquer, following the Japanese kintsugi tradition. Broken but healed, with the damage becoming part of the beauty. I studied the piece, moved by its resonance with my experience. "There's truth in that," I agreed, though I'm still in the process of finding beauty in the brokenness. We continued, deeper into the forest until we reached a small clearing with a view of Mount Hood in the distance. James spread a blanket on the grass and unpacked our lunch. Artisanal sandwiches, fresh fruit, a thermos of iced herbal tea. We ate in comfortable silence, occasionally commenting on the view or sharing observations about the sculptures we had seen. I've been thinking about what you said at dinner the other night, James said eventually, about cancer burning away the non-essential, clarifying what matters. I nodded, remembering the conversation. It's one of the few gifts of serious illness, absolute clarity about priorities. What are yours now? He asked. Your priorities, I mean. The question deserved careful consideration. Health, obviously. Not just survival, but genuine well-being, physical and emotional, meaningful work, authentic relationships. I met his gaze directly. No more compromises on what matters, no more accommodating others at the expense of my own needs. Those sound like excellent priorities, James said, though potentially challenging for anyone hoping to be part of your life going forward. I smiled, acknowledging the implication. Not challenging for the right person, someone who values autonomy alongside connection, who understands that healthy boundaries enhance rather than diminish relationships. I paused, then added more softly. Someone who sees my strength as an asset rather than a threat. James reached across the blanket, his hand finding mine in a gentle clasp. I see your strength, Rebecca. It's what drew me to you long before the cancer, though perhaps I didn't have the courage to acknowledge it then. The moment stretched between us, layered with possibility. It would have been easy to lean forward, to bridge the small distance between us, to seek comfort and connection through physical intimacy. But something held me back. Not fear, exactly, but a recognition that timing mattered, that rushing toward relationship before my own healing was complete might undermine the very independence I had fought so hard to reclaim. I need to move slowly, I said, not withdrawing my hand but not advancing further either. There's still so much I'm processing, so much I'm rebuilding within myself. I understand, James replied, his thumb tracing small circles on my palm. I'm not going anywhere. We finished our picnic and packed up, walking back toward the park entrance in contented silence. As we neared the parking area, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it initially, not wanting to disrupt the peaceful atmosphere of the afternoon. But when it buzzed again moments later, I pulled it out, concerned that it might be something urgent. 2 missed calls from Nathan, followed by a text. Call me as soon as possible, Daniel. Important. A cold unease settled in my stomach. I'm sorry, I said to James. I need to make a call. It might be significant. He nodded understandingly. Of course, I'll wait by the car. I stepped away for privacy, returning Nathan's call with a sense of foreboding. He answered immediately, his voice tense. Rebecca, thank you for calling back. There's been an incident with Daniel. What kind of incident? I asked, bracing myself for whatever might follow. He showed up at my house last night, extremely agitated. He was talking about the insurance policy, claiming you had stolen what was rightfully his, that he needed it now more than ever because of his diagnosis. Nathan paused, and I could hear him struggling to maintain composure. He had been drinking, which he's not supposed to do with his medication. I tried to calm him down, offered to let him stay the night, but he left suddenly. This morning, the police called. He was found unconscious in his car outside your neighborhood. Pills and alcohol. The information hit me in waves. Daniel's escalating desperation, his self-destructive choices, his proximity to my home during what appeared to be a suicide attempt. Is he alive? Yes, Nathan confirmed. They pumped his stomach. He's in the psychiatric unit now, on a 72-hour hold. I'm his emergency contact. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it despite everything. That must be incredibly difficult for you. It is, Nathan admitted. But that's not why I called. The police found a letter in his car addressed to you. They gave it to me since they knew we were connected. I haven't opened it, but given the circumstances, I thought you should know about it immediately. A letter. written in what Daniel might have believed were his final moments, found in what might have been intended as his final resting place, just outside my neighborhood. The implications were disturbing on multiple levels. What does the psychiatric team say about his condition? I asked, trying to process this development rationally, despite the emotional turmoil it evoked. They believe it was a genuine attempt, Nathan said gravely. He's being closely monitored. They're adjusting his medications for both the kidney disease and the apparent depression. I see. I took a deep breath, centering myself. I appreciate you letting me know, Nathan. And I'm truly sorry about what you're going through with him. There's one more thing, Nathan added hesitantly. He's been asking for you. The doctors say it's up to you whether to visit or not, but they think it might help his mental state to resolve whatever issues are driving this behavior. The request landed heavily. Visit Daniel in the psychiatric unit? Engage directly with the man who had abandoned me during my own health crisis, who had been harassing me about the insurance policy, who had apparently attempted suicide in proximity to my home. The idea seemed absurd, a complete violation of the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. And yet, the Daniel lying in that hospital bed was not simply my ex-husband, the man who had betrayed me. He was also a human being in profound crisis, suffering from both physical illness and mental distress. Could I simply turn away, knowing that my presence might contribute to his recovery? Was that the person I wanted to be? Someone who prioritized boundaries over compassion, self-protection over basic humanity? I need to think about it, I told Nathan. This is a lot to process. Of course, he said. Take whatever time you need. He'll be in the hospital for at least 3 days. Regardless. After hanging up, I stood motionless in the dappled forest light, trying to absorb the enormity of what Nathan had shared. When James approached, concern evident in his expression, I realized I must have been standing there longer than I intended. Everything okay? He asked gently. No, I admitted. Not even remotely, but it's not an immediate emergency. I hesitated, then decided honesty was necessary. It's about Daniel. There's been a situation. He's in the hospital after what appears to be a suicide attempt. James's expression shifted from concern to alarm. Rebecca, I'm so sorry. That's terrible news, regardless of your history. Yes, I agreed. It is terrible. And complicated, given that it seems at least partly related to his fixation on my insurance policy. We walked back to our vehicles in subdued silence, the peaceful mood of our afternoon irrevocably altered by Nathan's call. At my car, James asked carefully, "Is there anything I can do? Anything you need?" I considered the question, appreciating his willingness to support without assuming what that support should look like. Not right now, I said. I need time to think, to figure out how to respond to this situation. Of course. He hesitated, then added, Whatever you decide, whatever feels right to you in this moment, I support it. There's no guidebook for navigating something like this. His words stayed with me as I drove home, as I settled onto my porch swing with a cup of tea, as I watched the summer evening deepen toward twilight. There was indeed no guidebook for this situation, no clear moral pathway through the thicket of complicated emotions and ethical considerations. I called Olivia that evening, needing the perspective of someone who knew both Daniel and me, who understood the full context of our relationship and its dissolution. She listened without interruption as I detailed Nathan's call and the decision I now faced. "What do you think I should do?" I asked when I had finished. "Visit him or maintain my distance?" Olivia was quiet for a long moment before responding. "This isn't about should, Beck. There's no right answer here. No perfect solution that balances compassion with self-protection. It's about what you can live with, what aligns with your own values and healing process." "That's not very helpful," I said, though I knew she was right. "Okay, let me put it this way," she continued. "If you visited him and it resulted in renewed Harassment or emotional manipulation, how would that impact your recovery? Conversely, if you chose not to visit and later learned he had made another attempt, how would you feel about that decision? These were the essential questions, the core considerations that would guide my choice. I sat with them through the night, weighing my responsibility to my own well-being against the basic human impulse toward compassion for suffering. By morning, I had reached a decision. I would visit Daniel once, accompanied by Nathan, with clear boundaries and expectations established beforehand. I would listen to whatever he needed to say without accepting responsibility for his choices. I would express basic human care without reopening the door to a relationship that had proven destructive to my own health and happiness. I called Nathan and outlined my conditions: a single visit, his presence throughout, a maximum duration of 30 minutes, and no discussion of the insurance policy or financial matters. If Daniel violated these boundaries, I would leave immediately. Nathan agreed readily, expressing gratitude for my willingness to visit at all. The psychiatric unit was on the top floor of the hospital where I had received my cancer treatment, a coincidence that felt significant somehow, as if the building itself contained the full circle of our relationship, from commitment to betrayal to this final, complex interaction. Nathan met me in the lobby, his face drawn with worry and fatigue. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. "How is he today?" I asked as we rode the elevator up. "More stable. The medication adjustment seems to be helping. He's calmer, more coherent." Nathan hesitated, then added, "I gave him the parameters you established. He agreed to respect them." We were buzzed through the secure doors of the unit and escorted to a small private room furnished with simple chairs and a low table. Daniel was already waiting, seated by the window, gazing out at the summer sky. He turned as we entered, and I was struck again by how diminished he appeared. Thinner, paler, somehow smaller than the confident man who had dominated my life for 15 years. "Rebecca," he said, his voice hoarse. "You came." "Yes." I took the chair opposite him, maintaining physical distance while establishing eye contact. "Nathan told me what happened. I'm sorry you're going through this difficult time." Daniel glanced at his brother, then back to me. I wasn't thinking clearly. The kidney diagnosis, the financial pressures, the realization of everything I'd thrown away. He trailed off, shaking his head. It all became too much. I nodded, acknowledging his words without offering absolution. I understand that feeling of overwhelm. I experienced it myself during cancer treatment. The implicit comparison hung in the air between us. Daniel had the grace to look ashamed, his gaze dropping to his hands folded in his lap. "I failed you then," he admitted, completely and inexcusably. "Yes," I agreed, not unkindly, but without mitigation. "You did." "And now I've failed myself too," he continued. "Ended up here, pathetic and broken, exactly what I was afraid of becoming when you were diagnosed." The confession was startling in its honesty. "What do you mean?" Daniel sighed heavily. "When you got sick, I was terrified, not just of losing you, but of what it would mean for me, becoming a caretaker, watching you suffer, facing mortality every day. I couldn't handle it. I ran because I was a coward, because Vanessa represented escape from all that fear and responsibility. It was perhaps the most genuine thing Daniel had ever said to me, an admission not calculated to elicit sympathy or achieve a specific outcome, but simply to acknowledge a painful truth. In that moment, I saw him clearly, not the villain I had constructed in my anger, nor the hero he had pretended to be during our marriage, but simply a flawed human being who had made devastating choices from a place of fear and weakness. "Thank you for that honesty," I said. "It helps me understand, though it doesn't change what happened between us." "I know," he acknowledged. "Nothing can change that. But I needed you to know that it was never about you not being enough or me not loving you. It was about my own inadequacy, my inability to face difficulty with courage. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his confession settling between us. Then Daniel reached into the pocket of his hospital robe and withdrew an envelope. "Nathan said you know about the letter they found in my car." "Yes," I confirmed. "He mentioned it." Daniel extended the envelope toward me. "It's yours, if you want it, though I understand if you'd rather not read it." I considered the envelope, considering what it might contain. Accusations, manipulations, desperate pleas, or genuine remorse. Did I want those words in my consciousness, potentially destabilizing the careful equilibrium I had established? Or might they provide a form of closure? A final understanding that would allow me to fully release the lingering attachments to our shared past? "I'll take it," I decided, accepting the envelope but not opening it. "Though I may not read it immediately." Daniel nodded, seeming relieved to have transferred this final communication. "About the insurance policy," he began, then stopped as I tensed visibly. "I'm not asking for anything," he clarified quickly. "I just want you to know that I've instructed my attorney to withdraw any claims or inquiries. The policy is yours, as it should be. I was wrong to pursue it." The concession surprised me, representing as it did a complete reversal of his previous position. What changed? "Nearly dying provides its own kind of clarity," Daniel said with a grim smile. I realized that fighting over that policy, trying to claim what I had willingly forfeited when I left you, it was just another form of cowardice, another attempt to escape the consequences of my own actions. Nathan, who had been silent throughout our exchange, spoke up gently. "The doctors have recommended a longer-term treatment plan for Daniel, both for the kidney disease and the depression. He'll be transferring to a residential facility after discharge from here." "That sounds like a good plan," I said, genuinely relieved that Daniel would be receiving comprehensive care. "I wish you well with your treatment, Daniel. Truly." He nodded, his eyes filling with tears that he made no attempt to hide. "Thank you for coming. I know you didn't have to. I know I didn't deserve it after how I treated you." "This isn't about deserving," I said, echoing Olivia's wisdom. "It's about choosing compassion where possible, even in difficult circumstances." I stood then, indicating that our time was concluding. Daniel remained seated, seemingly understanding that this visit was not the beginning of renewed contact, but rather a final, compassionate closure to our shared history. "Goodbye, Daniel," I said simply. "Goodbye, Rebecca," he responded. "Be happy. You deserve that more than anyone I know." Walking out of the hospital into the bright summer day, letter in hand but unopened, I felt an unexpected lightness. The visit hadn't erased the pain of Daniel's betrayal or magically resolved the complex emotions of our broken relationship. But it had provided something I hadn't realized I needed. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a kind of completion, a closing of the circle that allowed me to move forward without the weight of unresolved anger. Nathan walked me to my car, his expression grateful but concerned. "Will you be okay?" "Yes," I said, knowing it was true. "I'm already okay." This was just confirmation of that fact. That evening, I sat in my garden as dusk fell, the envelope from Daniel on the small table beside me. I had delayed opening it, uncertain whether its contents would add anything valuable to the understanding I had reached during our hospital visit. But as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, I decided that leaving it unread represented a kind of fear, of being hurt again, of having my hard-won peace disrupted. And I had promised myself, through all the trials of cancer and divorce, that I would not allow fear to dictate my choices any longer. I opened the envelope carefully and unfolded the single page within. Daniel's handwriting was uneven, suggesting he had indeed been in a highly disturbed state when composing it. The letter was brief. "Rebecca, By the time you read this, I will likely be gone. I want you to know that my actions are not your responsibility. You owed me nothing after how I failed you during your illness. The insurance policy was always rightfully yours. I pursued it out of desperation and selfishness, the same qualities that led me to abandon you when you needed me most. The truth is, I have been punishing myself since the day I left you. Not because leaving was wrong. Our marriage had fundamental problems that predated your diagnosis, but because of how I left, the cowardice and cruelty I displayed in my timing and methods. I couldn't face your suffering because it forced me to confront my own inadequacy, my own mortality. My kidney diagnosis brought everything full circle. Suddenly, I was the vulnerable one, the one facing an uncertain medical future. And unlike you, I had no one standing beside me. No one offering the unwavering support that you deserved but didn't receive from me. This is not a bid for your pity or forgiveness. It is simply the truth, offered too late, but with complete sincerity. You were always the stronger one, the more authentic soul. I hope you find happiness equal to your courage. Daniel. I folded the letter and returned it to its envelope, not angry or upset, but thoughtful. There was a symmetry to our stories that I hadn't fully appreciated before, both of us facing life-threatening illness, both of us confronting mortality and vulnerability, but with profoundly different resources and responses. I had faced cancer with resilience and support, emerging stronger despite Daniel's abandonment. He had faced kidney disease alone, crumbling under the weight of illness compounded by guilt and regret. The realization didn't inspire smugness or satisfaction, only a quiet compassion and gratitude for the network of genuine love that had sustained me through my darkest hours. My mother's unwavering presence, Olivia's practical support, the cancer castaways' shared understanding, and new connections like James, whose respect for my autonomy created space for authentic connection. I picked up my phone and texted James. Decision made, visit completed. I'm at peace with it. Thank you for understanding yesterday. His response came quickly. I'm glad. Your compassion is one of your many strengths. Still on for dinner Friday? Absolutely, I replied, smiling at the simple pleasure of making plans, of looking forward rather than backward. The insurance policy that had become such a focal point of conflict would remain unchanged, my mother still the primary beneficiary. But its significance had diminished dramatically. It was no longer a symbol of betrayal or protection, just a practical financial instrument that would hopefully remain untapped for many years to come. As darkness settled completely over my garden, I thought about the long journey from diagnosis to this moment of genuine peace. Cancer had taken much. From me, my breast, my energy, my marriage, my illusions about love and loyalty. But it had given me something precious in return. The absolute certainty that I could face the worst life might offer and emerge not just surviving, but truly living, on my own terms, surrounded by authentic love and new possibilities. I carried the letter inside and placed it in a drawer with other mementos of my past life, not displayed or dwelling in, but preserved as part of the complete story that had shaped me. Then I opened my laptop and began working on materials for the peer mentoring program, eager to transform my hard-won wisdom into support for others beginning their own cancer journeys. The future stretched before me, uncertain as it is for everyone, but rich with potential and no longer shadowed by fear. Whatever came next, continued health or new challenges, professional success or setbacks, relationship with James or independence, I would face it with the strength and clarity that had emerged from the crucible of the past year. The life insurance beneficiary had been changed, yes. But more importantly, I had been changed. Not broken, but transformed. My fractures mended with gold like the kintsugi pottery that had so moved me in the forest exhibition. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.